The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We are here. I braved the ice and braved the snow, and fortunately the subway was running on time, and we're here, Lewis. We are doing a new show, and I could not wait to get in today because we are seeing so much confusion from the right in terms of the difference between the debt and the deficit after news revealed that President Obama has reduced George W. Bush's $1.4 trillion deficit by 75%. And the comments online make it abundantly clear that people just don't get the difference between what we mean when we say the deficit and, separate from that, what we mean when we say the national debt. So the debt represents the total amount of debt, whereas the deficit is the shortfall per year in terms of revenues not, or rather expenditures exceeding revenues. So to give you an example, if in year one you have a deficit of $100 billion, after that first year, you will now owe $100 billion. That will be your debt. If in year two, you reduce the deficit from $100 billion to $50 billion, you have cut the deficit 50% on a yearly basis, but you are still accumulating $50 billion more in debt. Thus, in year two, you have increased your debt to $150 billion while you have cut the deficit by 50%. I thought, Lewis, that this was a pretty simple concept.
I thought so too. I'm with you here on this, but I know that there's some people out there who are very confused.
So based on our newfound understanding of the difference between debt and deficit, yesterday, the Congressional Budget Office released a report saying that the deficit will be $468 billion for the budget year that ends this coming September. That is a smaller deficit than last year's $483 billion deficit. Of course, when President Obama came to office, the annual deficit topped $1 trillion, including by a record $1.4 trillion in 2009, carried over from the George W. Bush explosion of the deficit. As a share of the economy, the Congressional Budget Office says that this year's deficit will be slightly below the historical average of the last 50 years. Lewis, once I saw these numbers, obviously I said, it is a lie. Obama is Kenyan, full stop.
Some people will tell you that he tripled the deficit. Some people will tell you that it was multiplied 10 times under him. People like to make up numbers, I've noticed.
Yes, they do. So please understand the difference between debt and deficit. And if you're just going to attack the Congressional Budget Office, remember that this is the same organization that you likely trusted under different administrations or when it came to different issues or subjects. So let's all remember that. Let's talk about the Affordable Care Act because we have huge news over the last 48 to 72 hours regarding the Affordable Care Act. First of all, on 60 Minutes, Scott Pelley asked during an interview with Republican Speaker of the House, John Boehner, and Republican Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, you have talked about repealing Obamacare. In fact, they tried to do it dozens and dozens of times. What is your alternative to the Affordable Care Act? What would you do to ensure that people get care? You would think, Lewis, if you are the party that for years has been attempting to circumvent or repeal the Affordable Care Act by any means necessary, that you would have some idea of what you would do instead. Unfortunately, John Boehner and Mitch McConnell had absolutely no idea. Let's go to the video. Let's go to the audio. This makes me cringe because it's just so embarrassing and immoral.
Well, there were millions of Americans who had no access to health care because they didn't have health insurance. What's your health plan?
So, providing more access, we could have done without taking control of the entire healthcare system. When you look at Obamacare, it's a perfect example of what Washington does. It's a one-size-fits-all approach for the whole country, all driven by Washington bureaucrats. I bet they've hired tens of thousands of people between the IRS and over at Health and Human Services just to run this. All the decisions, all the rules decided by Washington. We have a wide, diverse country. And I just think it's time for us to look at this differently. For those who don't have access to affordable health insurance, and helping those at the bottom, I think we're all for it. But we don't need Washington to ruin the best health care delivery system the world's ever known.
So how do you do it? What's the Republican health care plan?
We're working on this, having discussions amongst our members. We got a lot of divergent views about how best to go back to a doctor-patient relationship that's revered, about rewarding medical professionals.
It went on like this. 2 attempts from Scott Pelley, no real answers. Eventually, Scott Pelley said what was obvious to anybody who watched the interview, which was, you don't have an alternative. There is no plan to replace the Affordable Care Act. You are presenting no options. And ultimately, Boehner says, well, we're now working on it. If you're only now working on the replacement to Obamacare, what if your first repeal attempt 5 years ago or whenever it was had actually succeeded? It would have taken you until 2015 to start working on a replacement?
I don't think they want a replacement, right? They want the system we had before because they think that that is what's best for, I guess, for health insurance companies. There haven't really been any attempts by Republicans to insure uninsured people, except for maybe one, which was Mitt Romney, who basically did Obamacare in Massachusetts.
And then had to run away and create, well, it was the right thing at the state level, but at the federal level, it would be wrong to do the exact same thing that I championed and passed in Massachusetts. It was just amazing. And the problem is, I don't know that many right-wingers will even get the message that they have no plan for replacing the Affordable Care Act, which is incredibly popular, by the way, unless maybe they start broadcasting the 60 Minutes interview during episodes of, I don't know, Duck Dynasty or the reruns of Sarah Palin's reality show. I don't know that the people that need to get the message are going to get it.
And I don't think they care. I think that they think, like Boehner and McConnell, that Obamacare is just a terrible thing that needs to disappear because it's too expensive.
Aside from what we now know about Obamacare, that the provisions in it are very popular, that Obamacare is working, that we are seeing a huge decrease in the number of uninsured Americans who are costing everybody a lot of money when they go to the emergency room without insurance, we now are learning from the Congressional Budget Office that the Affordable Care Act will end up costing around 20% less than was initially projected. The Affordable Care Act turns out to be slightly more affordable than what we even imagined. It will cost 20% less than previously projected over the next decade. The reason for this revised estimate is a result of a decline of healthcare inflation, according to the Los Angeles Times, and a decrease in the number of uninsured Americans, according to the CBO. Through 2019, the law's insurance provisions will cost an estimated $571 billion, down $139 billion from the original nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office estimates. It is not all good news because by 2025, the CBO does estimate that 31 million people would still not have health insurance, in part due to the increase in the population expected over the next 10 years. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court is going to be taking up King versus Burwell, a case which could strike down the federal subsidies offered in the Affordable Care Act, which make it affordable to low-income Americans. So if that does happen, the CBO would have to again revise these estimates. But good news all around, Lewis.
Yeah, pretty good news. The idea of Obamacare is that in the long term, it will save Americans lots and lots and lots of money. And so I think we're headed in that direction with it.
Are Republicans going to react and say, see, David, Obama lied about how much it would cost. It's actually costing less. And all of this is because Obama is just a Muslim, Indonesian, British, Kenyan, who knows what else kind of liar. Obama lied and people got health care for less than Obama said. I say we impeach the guy.
We can't be having people getting government handouts, David. They're parasites, all of them.
Of course, as we talked about, the Congressional Budget Office does estimate that even in spite of the decreased cost of the Affordable Care Act, we still will have tens of millions of uninsured people by 2025. And when you ask me what the obvious logical solution is for healthcare in this country, it is single-payer healthcare. It is some kind of universal coverage like all other countries at our level of development. Most all other countries at our level of development have woken up and realized that is the logical solution. And single-payer healthcare is still very, very popular with Americans. Over 50% of Americans say that they support single-payer healthcare, including even 25% of Republicans. And this is just based on people's current understanding. You know, Lewis, that a lot of the people saying they don't support it don't even know what it is.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are different terms for it, for the system, and single payer might not be the most ubiquitous term.
Medicare for all would be another term, although, of course, that would also be confusing to people. It just seems like it's difficult to actually get everybody on the same page and even understanding what it is. But in spite of that, we still have more than 50% of the country saying that single payer is the way, and even 1 out of 4 Republicans. And another proposed idea back from the original Obamacare discussions, which was that of the public option, is also very, very popular. Only 13% of people say they oppose a public option. And the basic poll, 1,500 likely voters, nothing unusual about the polling information. And Republicans would go to such great, let me backtrack. Republican lawmakers would go to such great lengths to prevent single-payer health care where everybody gets health care, in part because of this kind of obvious thing that we know, Lewis. They're in bed with the insurance companies, but many Democrats are also in bed with the insurance companies. But because of this strict father morality of the right, where not everybody deserves to have health care, so why would we just give it to everybody, Lewis?
Yeah, well, my arguments would be fiscal arguments. My arguments would be logical arguments, I think. Of course, I still think that it is the moral thing to do.
I would also invite all of these strict father morality right-wingers to opt out of Medicare when they turn 65 years old and stick with some kind of private plan that they pay for. Forgo the government option if you are so against it in principle, but they probably do deserve it, Lewis.
Oh, of course they deserve it. They deserve everything, including their incredibly high salaries.
Make sure to follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/David Pakman Show. After the break, Sarah Palin is back in a completely unhinged rant at the so-called Iowa Freedom Forum or Freedom, I think it's the Freedom Forum. We'll talk about that next.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to The David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show is mostly funded by individual viewers through our membership program. Please go to davidpakman.com/membership to become a member today. Today's new member of the day is Christopher Weber. Christopher Weber, who shares a name, Lewis, with a former NBA basketball player that I used to be a fan of, Chris Weber, who I think now is an analyst. I assume, of course, that there is no connection. Thank you to Christopher Weber for being a David Pakman Show member. You can sign up at davidpakman.com/membership. Sarah Palin delivered something that I guess is technically considered a speech, although I have a really hard time calling it that, at the Iowa Freedom Summit. Part of her commentary was advice to Republicans about how to defeat Hillary Clinton. And even by Sarah Palin's incredibly low standards, this speech was particularly incoherent, scattered, and just riddled with run-on and fragment sentences. Let's take a look at a little bit of the video here.
And we don't sit on our thumbs this next time when one of our own is being crucified and falsely accused of whatever the hip accusation of the day happens to be, right? Racism, sexism, whatever. Really, it's kind of Orwellian observing how that works, that rule of Saul Alinsky's, no doubt, that the left employs. Disgusting charges from the left that reverse them. For it is they who point a finger, not really, they have triple that amount of fingers pointing right back at them. revealing that they are the ones who really discriminate and divide on color and class and sex.
Not a single non-white face that I could spot in the audience, Lewis, listening to this absolute insanity. Let me remind the audience that this woman was almost the vice president. She could have been the vice president as opposed to someone shooting elk on a failed reality show. I don't know who to thank, Lewis, for the fact that she's not. I guess Obama, right?
No, I think you can thank her. I think she is the one who ruined her own chances and McCain's chances of being in the White House.
Let's pick just a random 30 seconds from some other part of her half-hour rant and see what she had to say.
And we get honest on national security. We give hope to the people that we need not, we will not succumb to evil. And we call it as it is. We address it. That must be, by the way, that 800-pound elephant in the room of the White House that the radical left won't even name. They won't even name the threat to our way of life today. We'll hit it. We'll name it.
Yeah, I have no idea what this is even about. I mean, I would love to just issue some kind of substantive comment about the speech, but none of it makes any sense to me. Think about how much she gets paid for these speeches. That's really what should anger people.
There is, I noticed that there was a lot of Iowa ass kissing in the speech. I guess that's just par for the course. Whatever state you're in, kiss some butt. But totally disjointed, totally disconnected, no substance. It was completely insane.
Her speeches are kind of like when you're stuck at a social gathering and there's all sorts of people you would like to be talking to, but somehow you just can't get away from that person who keeps telling you about how they're now completely off sugar in their diet, all while rambling incoherently and on their phone at the same time and spilling their drink on themselves, and you just can't get away. That's kind of what it's like listening to Sarah Palin speak.
I think that's a nice way to put it. It's worse than that for me.
Same-sex couples in Alabama will have to put their wedding plans on hold after a federal judge issued a 2-week stay on her ruling, which struck down Alabama law banning gay marriage. The big news to me is not that there's a 2-week stay, because we see that very often, particularly in the most virulent anti-gay states, but that the gay marriage ban in Alabama was struck down by a judge. And Lewis, we have this conversation so often because it's happening time and time again. The states that we would have imagined as the last holdouts in the bigoted fight against marriage equality are one by one tumbling like dominoes.
And if it's a constitutional argument that all of the judges and all of the other states have made in striking down these bans, it's just logical that even these other holdouts will follow, because it does seem to be against our laws.
And the Supreme Court is going to take this up, and we may have a broad ruling on same-sex marriage from the Supreme Court by early summer. And this would just be fantastic if the Supreme Court just puts this entire issue to bed. And I actually don't know what the anti-gay religious groups will do. If the Supreme Court just says, this is over, state same-sex marriage bans are not allowed, period, what will the anti-gay religious right do? Will they go completely apoplectic and their heads will explode and they'll continue trying to fight gay marriage? Will they simply move on and just focus on abortion and teaching non-science in schools? I really don't know what they'll do.
I think they'll keep fighting it. For some reason, this is the number one issue for them. And I think they'll fight it even if across the board we have equality.
In the wake of the decision by an Alabama judge to strike down the state's gay marriage ban, which now is in the middle of a 2-week stay, an elected official who is gay in Alabama is threatening to reveal the sexual affairs of so-called families values colleagues. This is State Representative Patricia Todd from Birmingham. And she had a warning for her state house colleagues over the weekend, quote, "I will not stand by and allow legislators to talk about family values when they have affairs, and I know of many who are and have." She is the only openly gay lawmaker. "I will call our elected officials who want to hide in the closet out. It is pretty well known that we have people in Montgomery who are or have had affairs. I just want them to be careful what they're saying. Some of it might come back to stick on them." This is all in response to some of the backlash that she's gotten from or heard, not directly, not directed at her in particular, but just in general after this decision in Alabama, saying, hey, I'm going to reveal your affairs, you so-called families, values, traditionalists. I love this, Lewis.
Yeah, I think it's important. You could say that this is petty and that this is, immature, but I don't think it is. This is a huge double standard. And if you can point this out, I think it may make some of the voters and some of the constituents realize that, hey, these Republicans aren't the heroes we thought they were.
In a vacuum, you could argue that this is kind of capricious and outside of the bounds of politics. But the thing is, these conservative lawmakers tout their family values and their morals and their religious tenets as part of the reason why they're opposed to others having equality when it comes to marriage. So if they are making their values an issue, I feel that it is completely valid to explore exactly what those values are and expose double standards.
Of course, you got to point out that hypocrisy because they're just pulling the wool over the head of their constituents.
And of course, Patricia Todd making the fiscal conservative argument as well, which is that Alabama continuing to fight gay marriage is a waste of limited state resources. How many times have we said that, Lewis? Fiscal conservatism, making more laws to dictate the minutia of what people are doing in the bedroom and what relationships they're having. There's nothing fiscally conservative about that.
Not at all. And, the states with the most limited resources seem to be the ones that are spending the most money on this.
Yeah, no question about it. It's just incredible. Truly, truly incredible. Let's take a break. Next, I will speak to Zach Ingrasci, one of the filmmakers of a really great documentary that I watched last week. That's coming up.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by Zach Ingrasci, one of the producers, filmmakers of the documentary film Living on $1. Zach, let's start for people who maybe aren't familiar with the film. I saw it last week. Tell our audience a little bit about what you guys did.
Absolutely. So Living on $1 follows our journey as we live in this rural village in Guatemala on less than $1 a day. And although it follows our own experience living at that level, it also takes an intimate look at our neighbors' lives, specifically three amazing people, Rosa, Chino, and Anthony.
So this originally started out as some viral YouTube videos, and then eventually, if I understand the story correctly, you turned this into more of a full-length documentary. What was it that people were saying? What was the reaction to the short YouTube clips first?
Well, so this was, like you said, was never meant to be a feature-length documentary. We, at the time, were students studying poverty and kept hearing the statistic that 1.1 billion people live on less than $1 a day. And, growing up in Seattle, Chris grew up in Connecticut, we had no context for what does that really mean. So while we were going through this experience in Guatemala, we were uploading these video blogs to YouTube. And we quickly found out that, everyone around the world, especially back in the States, felt this same disconnect. And I think it's really, being able to see through film into this very different reality that that hooked people into it. And we actually, like you said, had over 1 million views on YouTube, which inspired us to create the feature-length film.
I want to get to talking a little more specifically about the difference between kind of what we might consider developed nation poverty and what you guys are talking about, which is people living on $1 or less a day. But before we get to that, I started watching the film and it popped up on Netflix. The concept struck me as interesting. And I'll tell you this because ultimately I thought that it was really well done. In the first 5 minutes, I started having somewhat of a negative reaction, or I'll say the first 5 minutes that you guys were actually down in Guatemala. And I said, I'm getting the feeling that these guys are seeing this sort of like a game of being transported into this world that really isn't their world, and knowing that anytime they want, they can just fly back to the United States. And I would say 10 minutes later, it started getting very real. And the way that you guys actually involved yourselves in the local communities, it was very clear from the film that it was not a sort of kind of privileged yuppies going on, a brief vacation to see how poor people live. A lot of the experiences hit you guys pretty hard, didn't they?
Absolutely. I mean, I remember this one morning that we woke up on the dirt floor, and we were sleeping on the dirt floor, as many people in this community were, and getting bit by fleas every night. And I woke up, and that day, we didn't even have enough money for food, let alone medicine to treat. Chris at the time was suffering from giardia, which it's a parasite you get from the drinking water there, because you're actually getting the water out of a pipe out of the side of the hill. And it just hit us so hard that all of our neighbors who work in this informal economy, on average make less than $1 a day, it's such a difficult thing to manage that small amount of money to not only pay for your food, but for your medicine, for your kids' education, for all of these costs that we deal with every day back in the States. But they have to be incredibly innovative to manage that amount of money to survive.
And to replicate that, correct me if I'm wrong, you guys, to replicate the kind of uncertainty in terms of you might average $1 a day over a month, but you might not be getting $1 every day. Talk to us about how you guys simulated that.
Right. So the statistic is really misleading, actually. So this $1 a day statistic, it's actually an average over a year. So it comes from the fact that most people work in the informal economy. So they might, someday they might have work. 1 week they might not have work. People are working as farmers. They're working as day laborers. So what we did is we took our $56 each. We were there for 56 days. And we split that into random numbers between 0 and 9. And then we would draw from a hat each day that number. That would be our income for the day. And some days we would draw very low numbers, and there was a week where we were actually living on less than 12 cents a day. And what this replicated was, that people living in extreme poverty have very irregular incomes. And like I said before, they have to be very innovative to manage that amount of money. And that's something that really surprised us. And people in this community were actually using all these informal tools. One of our friends was using a savings group. So he'd get together with 12 of his friends. Each week they would put in $10, and one person would take home that $120. And that $120, that lump sum of money, would allow them to invest in things like a stove and different things. They used all these different techniques to manage that tiny amount of money to actually survive. And
in seeing the film, what you guys did, I think, a great job of showing is when you're at this level of income, an extra $1 a day can represent an increase of 100% of your income. So I think that's hard for people in the kind of developed world who are not living in poverty to even wrap their minds around, which is that second $1 can be life-altering for so many people when it represents 100% or maybe even more of their daily income.
Absolutely, and it should be incredibly empowering for us, because if we can provide people with the opportunity to raise their income by $1 each day, so they're making $2 a day, like you said, that's doubling their income. And a lot of times, we think of things in such huge steps. How do we, move someone completely out of poverty tomorrow? But the reality is, these incremental changes, these small impacts in someone's life, can create huge change in their life. And I think one of the best examples of this is this woman named Rosa, who's actually one of the stars of our film. And in the 6th grade, she had to drop out of elementary school because her father became sick, and she had to help provide for her family. But she had this dream of becoming a nurse, and she wouldn't let that dream go. And she ended up starting a weaving business with a tiny loan of $200 from a microfinance bank, which loans directly to people in extreme poverty and specifically tailored to their needs. And with that loan and this business, she was able to put herself back through school, and is actually on her way to becoming a nurse. And, this little $200 loan that normally we would totally take for granted, $200 isn't too much, she was actually able to double her income and be able to afford to put herself back through school and pursue this dream that she's had for her whole life.
When we think about, to get back to what we were talking about a little earlier, when we think about this level of extreme poverty, $1 a day or so, do you get the sense that many people, when they think about poverty, it's this sort of amorphous blob where developed nation below the federal poverty line poverty is kind of bunched in with people that are living on $1 a day as if they're all sort of equally poor? Do you get a sense that that happens sometimes?
Yeah, I think, even from my own experience, that happens. And the reality is poverty in every country has a different face. There are different causes. People have access to different resources, don't have access to different resources. And, it's a very personal thing. I mean, even in this community of Peña Blanca, each one of our neighbors faced a very different challenge just because of the situation that they were in. Some people couldn't pay for their kids to go to school. Some people might have had, became sick, and that created this downward spiral. And like you were saying, the type of poverty we're seeing in rural Guatemala looks very different even than the poverty in cities in Guatemala. And then that looks even very different than poverty we see in the United States. People face very different challenges. The biggest being in rural Guatemala, a lot of people just don't have access to very, very basic needs like enough food. A lot of people were just eating rice and tortillas every day. Whereas in the United States, you tend not to see quite that level of food insecurity. A lot of times people are facing, much bigger social issues, less access to quality education or quality work, even, have security issues with gangs or the neighborhoods they're living in. So these issues that people are facing are very different.
And not to say that, of course, there isn't significant food insecurity in the U.S., but it's different, and there's no question that the film does a good job of kind of pointing that out. Last thing in the brief few minutes we have left here, the generosity of the people that you guys encountered, to me, was absolutely amazing. And we're talking, like the subject of the film is, people who are living on very little money, who still went out of their way, seemingly, to feed you guys and be generous with you guys.
Absolutely. The community in Peña Blanca was absolutely incredible. And, we learned so much from them. We were brought into people's homes. They were so generous with their time and their energy. And we've actually been back every year since we created the film. We have an update video coming out about the life of Rosa, who I mentioned earlier before. She's incredibly inspirational, which you can check out at our website, livingon1.org. And, it's a home away from home from us. It's somewhere that we will always go back to, and pretty special place.
We've been speaking with Zach Ingrasci. As he mentioned, the website is livingon1.org, and the film, which I highly recommend, is Living on $1. Zach, thanks so much for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Here's something funny. Kentucky State Senator Brandon Smith's lawyer argued in court that he should not be charged with driving under the influence because of a provision in the state constitution. I think you're really going to like this. Brandon Smith is a Republican, just so you know. Smith was arrested towards the beginning of the year, charged with speeding and a DUI after allegedly blowing a .088 on a preliminary breath test. He was reportedly driving 65 miles an hour in a 45 mile an hour zone. His attorney, Bill Johnson, filed a motion saying the charges should be dropped altogether because Section 43 of the state constitution says that Smith should never have been arrested in the first place. And the quote from that section is, "The members of the General Assembly shall, in all cases except treason, felony, breach or surety of the peace, be privileged from arrest during their attendance on the sessions of their respective houses, and in going to and returning from the same. And for any speech or debate in either house, they shall not be questioned in any other place. And Bill Johnson told the Associated Press that the provision was added to state law back in 1891 to keep legislators from being bothered by people who would arrest them during sessions. I have a very basic question about this, Lewis. How does drunk driving not violate the surety of the peace to everyone else who's on the road at the time?
I think that is a great question, and I think that pretty much sums this up. And also, let me give the viewers some extra insight into this senator.
Yeah.
This was the same guy who a while back, and we covered the story, said that climate change is a hoax because Earth and Mars have the exact same temperature. And that's who we're talking about here.
A lot of these odd laws, not surprisingly, were actually passed in the post-Civil War era, and they were really aimed at maintaining privilege, at protecting privilege, in spite of the fact that we no longer were allowed to own slaves in the U.S. And I don't know specifically whether this is one of those laws, but I've read about many of them. And the fact that they're now being cited is funny, but it's also funny to me that even the law as written shouldn't really be protecting this guy.
No, not at all. This is a clear violation, and I really hope that he does not get away with this.
We talked yesterday about how Mike Huckabee has indicated he would be interested potentially in running for president to fight what he calls the secular theocracy that has become the United States. Now, we talked yesterday about how if you have a secular society, one where religion is not used to make law, you are not, by definition, in a theocracy where religion is used to make law. So secular theocracy is somewhat of an oxymoron, but Mike Huckabee is kind of an oxymoron as well. He now has come out and said that there was no school violence when schools had Bibles and prayer, and that if we could just bring back Bibles and prayer to schools, there would also be no school violence. Here's how Huckabee said it.
As a kid, I remember we would have people come to our school and do assemblies and chapel services in a public school. And they would talk to us about Jesus. The Gideons would give us Bibles. And nobody got arrested. Nobody got sued. And by the way, nobody got hurt either. Because we were bringing Bibles to school, people weren't bringing guns to school, except for the deer hunters who left them in their trucks. We prayed at my school. We prayed the first thing every day. We said Pledge of Allegiance. We had a Bible reading. We had a prayer. And then we prayed again on the way to the cafeteria for lunch. Now, if you'd seen what they were serving in our cafeteria, you would have prayed too again.
If we want to just talk about how things were back in the good old days when Mike Huckabee was a kid, we also had segregation in full swing. Blacks could be lynched with impunity. Gays were treated as mentally ill. Marital rape and child abuse were swept under the rug. And women had to, as they said, Lewis, know their damn place. So I don't know that just saying the way things were when Huckabee was a kid is the right way, is a good idea for Republicans.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think he, we would speculate that he actually seemed like a smart guy, like perhaps one of the more reasonable candidates.
Yeah.
Then he comes out and says something like this, and it's disturbing.
And then as far as just the data, because we have information about whether there were or were not school shootings prior to 1962 when prayer was banned in school, he should probably do a little research first, because we can actually trace back school shootings all the way back to 1760. The earliest known United States school shooting happened when the Pontiac's Rebellion school massacre in July of 1764. 3 men entered a schoolhouse near present-day Greencastle, Pennsylvania, shot and killed the schoolmaster, and killed around 10 children. So I guess he was only off by a couple hundred years, Lewis, there. And even if you look at, the 1850s had at least 5 documented school shootings. The 1860s had 6 documented school shootings. Skip to the 1950s, before Bibles and prayer were banned in school. There were over 20 documented school shootings, and who knows how many did not make it into the record. Living in a factual fantasy world. And it's so interesting to me how you hear a comment like this from a guy like Huckabee. Your first reaction is that it's just incredibly misguided and it's just focused on this obsession with a Christian theocracy in the United States. But then when you actually analyze what has been said, you find out that it's mostly based on distortions, lies, or missing information as well.
And I think if we were to bring Bibles and prayer back, I mean, the Bible is just something that will make a certain percentage of the people who read it hate other people. That's just what it does. Not all of them, some of them.
And what about all the Bibles, Lewis, that have been used to justify shootings? People using the religion to justify a shooting.
Of course, yeah. I think it would do way more harm than good.
And also, what about the fact that we have had shootings in churches? You would think if Bibles prevented shootings and prayer prevented shootings, there would never be a shooting in a church.
We've got plenty of prayer and churches and Bibles in this country. We still have natural disasters. So what's going on with that?
No, it's a very, very good question, Lewis, and one that I'm sure, I guarantee you, Huckabee would have an answer for. We do have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. We have the Eggman checking in with us about our discussion of the anti-Semitism in Europe after the Charlie Hebdo massacre, including one group of people who told a reporter, as talked about on MSNBC, that shape-shifting magical Jews were to blame for the shooting. Here's the Eggman commenting on that.
Hey, Dave. I want to address the issue of the shape-shifting magical Jews.
Please.
So I did 30 months in federal prison quite a while ago, and I went in an atheist. However, I'm culturally Jewish. And when people wanted to discuss religion with me or anything like that, I would always brush it off. And I learned that when I told people I was Jewish, it got them scared. The meanest, toughest guys in prison don't want to fuck with the Jews. I'm saying that the power of the Jew works well in prison. Even the Nazi Aryan Brotherhood feared the Jews and would not fuck with us. And it was like having this magical layer of protection around. And I wore it. I have a big Star of David tattoo on my shoulder, and I was never scared. And it was very interesting.
Very interesting voicemail from the Eggman. I have no idea how much of that is true, but it makes for a very, very interesting story. No question about that. On today's bonus show, Lewis will talk to us about Dennis Rodman extending an invitation to Seth Rogen to come to North Korea. Apparently, Dennis Rodman, after vomiting and defecating in a North Korean hotel and getting kicked out, still allowed back and still, I guess, able to make invitations to people like Seth Rogen to go visit. Also, what are Florida police using for target practice? It may shock you, but if you've been paying any attention for the last 10 years, it might not shock you. Those stories and more on today's bonus show. How do you get access to the bonus show? Oh, it is very easy. You go to davidpakman.com/membership and sign up. Help us close out January strong in terms of new members. Sign up, get all of the great member benefits, and get more show, because that's really what it's all about.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.